Hi everyone, Tiffany here, flying solo for this episode. Now, Acting Minister in charge of Muslim Affairs Faishal Ibrahim resigned from Cabinet, Parliament, and the People's Action Party after Prime Minister Lawrence Wong said that his interactions with a woman fell short of standards required of a political office holder. Now, the matter came to light when the Prime Minister's office received an email from a woman about her interactions with Mr. Faishal. Most of these chats were online messages. In his resignation letter, Mr. Faishal said there was no physical relationship, but he decided to step away from politics. Mr. Faishal has also resigned from his role as Senior Minister of State for Home Affairs and as an MP in Marine Parade Braddell Heights GRC. So, we want to talk about this today. What are the standards we expect of our political office holders here in Singapore? With me online to discuss all of this, I have Dr Norshahril Saat, Principal Fellow at ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute.
Hello.
And Nicholas Fang, Managing Director at strategic consultancy firm Black Dot and former nominated Member of Parliament.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, gentlemen, I want to start with a little bit of background. There have been cases in the last 15 years of MPs from both sides of the party divide and office holders resigning over personal improprieties. Former Speakers of the House Tan Chuan Jin and Michael Palmer, and we also have former MP David Ong. Now, all three stepped down because of extramarital affairs. From the Workers' Party, Mr. Yaw Shin Leong lost his MP seat over an indiscretion, while Mr. Leon Pereira resigned over an affair with former party member Nicole Seah. In Mr. Faishal's case, there was, quote, no physical relationship, but his actions were deemed to have fallen short of standards required of a political office holder. What does this phrase mean in Singapore's political context?
First, I think you mentioned some of the previous cases of extramarital affairs. I think it's basically a speculation with regards to Prof. Faishal's case because, as mentioned, there was no criminal offences, there's an exchange of messages, so we are not really entirely sure in terms of the context of this case, whether we can compare it with the previous cases. But Prof. Faishal decided to make the decision to resign, and Prime Minister Lawrence Wong has accepted his resignation. And that's a very interesting question about the kind of standards. On the one hand, there are rules, regulations, laws, and clearly from this case, there was no criminal offences, and this is already clearly stated in the media reports. But I think what we are developing in Singapore is beyond laws and regulations. We're dealing with political conduct. And this is where I would say political culture that we are building in our society has to be very strong. And based on the indications, in other countries, maybe, I don't know whether the standards may differ, but in Singapore, it's clear that, if you are in the political office, you must hold high standards of morality and ethics. And this includes strong family values. And clearly, what these incidences have shown is that, such cases involving women or of that nature is not acceptable because you are a leader and you are judged by those standards. So I think it's important for us that the country has developed a very high standards of political culture.
I wanted to jump in on that because this notion of the standards for political parties is an interesting one. I think first and foremost, individual parties can set their standards. The People's Action Party, the incumbent ruling party, historically, we hear the phrases whiter than white. They demand a high level of ethics and irreproachable values from its politicians, from its leaders. And you see other political parties in Singapore, I see in some cases trying to keep pace with the ruling party. For example, the Workers' Party, when they address their incidents of potentially improper relationships between party members, for example. But then in other cases, for example, in the way that they dealt with Secretary General Pritam Singh over the recent case where he was found guilty of lying to Parliament, they take different standards as well. So it sort of sets a bit of a tone when it comes to the brand of individual political parties and what they mean, what they stand for, and how they take their members to task when transgressions, as it were, happen. But at the same time, I think I've seen some observers also talk about the role of the minister in charge of Muslim affairs. It has been said, and I'm sure Norshahril has potentially more insight into this, but it's a more special type of role that demands certain standards that the Malay Muslim community look upon this role with great importance as well, which potentially might explain why the outcome that we saw, and a pretty swift outcome from the time that or at least Prime Minister Lawrence Wong was informed about it to when action was taken was about 30 days, was about 1 month. So it's pretty fast, I think.
Do you agree, Shahril, that things moved very fast because of the position or the portfolio that Mr. Faishal held?
I think first and foremost, the standards set by the People's Action Party is also very high. So with or without him having the position of minister in charge of Muslim affairs, I think he is probably judged by the standards set by the political party. But speaking of which, when you are dealing with a portfolio that has a religious connotation, definitely, I think you are judged also by another set of values, which is, I would say, it's also applied generally. It's a universal value, a matter of morality, matter of trust. But definitely there is an added dimension to it, because you are in charge of Muslim affairs. You have to be a good Muslim, honesty, strong family values, how you behave in public. If I may add, the level of piety as well is also being judged, even though that's not probably not a requirement for political office. So so these are added dimension that probably, I don't know whether it actually was informed the decision made by both Minister Faishal and also the People's Action Party. Definitely building up on what Nicholas mentioned earlier as well, I think there was a huge disappointment as well. Generally, if you read online comments about Prof. Faisal's work, it goes beyond the Muslim affairs portfolio. He's a very strong grassroots leader, but definitely he has touched the hearts and minds of many Muslims here within a short span of 1 year of holding position in cabinet. Definitely is somebody that is regarded as in tune with society, and people are very, very disappointed with what happened.
What do you make of the differences between the handling of Mr. Tan Chuan Jin's case and this particular one? I mean, for one, I think, this was definitely handled more, faster, swiftly. Are there sort of other differences that you have noted, and what do you make of it?
I would say that this is probably the first case handled under Prime Minister Lawrence Wong. But definitely in terms of the timing, in terms of the swiftness, in terms of... But again, it's very difficult to make a comparison because we don't really have much information into what actually transpired between this case dealing with Mr. Faishal. So we can't broadly make that comparison in terms of the decision made by the party and the Prime Minister and the swiftness of this decision. If you recall, in the last general elections, there was a discussion about the Malay swing and the need to build the Malay leadership. And if you look at Prof. Faishal's profile at one point of time, he was not the most senior Malay politician, and ahead of him was Senior Minister of State Zaqy Mohamad. So he started off as the Minister of State. But I think there is a need for the leadership, this is again my speculation, to communicate with the Malay ground out there, and they found that Professor Faishal was the most suitable candidate. That's why I think he was made the acting minister. And I think the communications with the Malay community is something that is very close to Prof. Faishal's profile. So I think the party also had to make a swift decision because 1 year has passed, and to the next elections will take another 4 years, and they need to rebuild the ground very quickly. following up from the last elections.
And Nicholas, why is it important that it has to be dealt quickly? Is that a lesson that they learned, the People's Action Party?
The lack of information around Prof. Faishal's case makes it a little bit hard for us to make very concrete assessments. But when you talk about speed, I think that definitely is something that has become a bit of a hallmark of the whiter than white People's Action Party. I think dealing swiftly with issues, I think potentially working to ensure that there's greater stability and less uncertainty for both the office holder and his constituents and potentially his teams running the different portfolios that he's in charge of. Helping that process along will be quite important.
Clearly, this case has also signaled to everyone that we take your personal conduct very seriously. And do you think, in PAP's eyes, where is that line drawn between private conduct and your conduct that affects a person, and conduct that affects a person's ability to hold public office?
I think there is no, if you're holding to a political office, I think again, coming back to the earlier point that I mentioned about the political culture that we build. I mean, different countries may have different standards and what we want to establish. But if you read from the narratives from our founding fathers and how they built Singapore, and Nicholas mentioned a very good point about whiter than white, and that's always been a narrative, and bringing in talented people into the government. I think there is no separation between the private life and public life in Singapore's context. I mean, you always judge based on your conduct, and you have to maintain that the highest standards. And this, if you read the case carefully, it is actually a private message, a private message. But in this day and age, a private message could easily escalate into a public debate or public discourse with a matter of being screenshot and circulated on social media. So I think this is also a learning point for anyone out there who is interested to go into politics, to hold leadership positions, and you must be prepared to sacrifice. And this has always been embedded in narrative, and perhaps could be also one of the reasons why there are difficulties in getting people into politics. That could be the barrier, because the standard set is very high. But this is a good, in a way, practice, because we really want the best people to lead Singapore.
I mean, we have been talking about it from the party's point of view, but from the voters' point of view, in their eyes, do you think the constituents care? And I'm talking about 2026. If you are an MP, if you're my MP and you have been doing everything that I've asked you to do, my ward is clean, you have taken my request seriously, do you think the voters are able to tell the difference between your public life and your personal life?
I think that's a really good question, and I would add a second layer to the question, which is beyond whether they think it's important or not. It's another question of whether they should be thinking about these things. Now, I think for sure the primary concern for a lot of residents, just based on feedback and surveys that my companies have done over time, there is a huge prioritization on the municipal issues. Can you make sure that my estate is clean, that if I have problems you help me to fix it, that the bus services run on time, the MRT walkways are sheltered and things like that. But I don't necessarily think that we should allow that to then become the sole deciding factor of whether somebody can hold political office or not. Dr. Norshahril had already mentioned that we see different standards in other countries. We see, some leaders, just because they are able to speak in a very transactional way with voters, they are able to secure votes, regardless of whether they've been charged in court, whether their personal conduct has been, something to aspire to as well. And I don't necessarily think that just because the rest of the world is like that, Singapore should aspire to go in that way. There used to be a time when people would look at politicians and political leaders as examples, as something, you tell your kids, hey, if you work hard and you're a good person, one day you can be like that.
That's
and
right.
I think that is an important role that our leadership, whether political or otherwise, have to play within our society. And then to the question of whether the personal and the professional life can be separated, I think one of the views that I've heard is that if we can't trust you in your personal life, why should we then extend that trust to you just because you transition to your professional work? And we have to remember that political office holders make decisions that involve taxpayers' monies, for example. They are in positions where their influence can have a significant impact in a very practical, tangible way in society. So I think having that trust that, our leaders and office holders will do the right thing, regardless of whether people are watching or not, becomes something that's quite important and quite critical. And I think when we look at the ruling party and the incumbent government, I think they are also prioritizing that notion of trust, such that when they see anything that could cast a little bit of shade on this, we have to take action very quickly.
I also see the fact that, it's also rather challenging. It's becoming more challenging, right, to recruit good talent to run for politics. I know we want to try and hold these, high standards of conduct, but do you think all of these things might handicap further efforts to try and recruit good people into politics because now they have more things to consider about?
That could be one of the barriers, but that's certainly a dimension that young leaders who aspire to be leaders, have to think about. Because we live in a society, where the culture is different, the level of communications is different from our founding fathers. Populism is of course very important. A person has to be seen as somebody who can touch the hearts and minds of people. So I think I grew up in a situation where the narrative of political leadership has always been somebody who understands the grassroots, but in our political system, someone who can develop good policies. It's a very technocratic society, but in this day and age, technocracy alone is not enough. The level of communications, reaching out to people, which I think people in response to the recent Prof. Faishal case, were actually saying that he's actually a good leader when it comes to tackling municipal issues, reaching to the people. Is very, very in touch with the ground. He goes around meeting people, is accessible. So I think the nature of politics and the kinds of politicians going forward, the expectations of a leader has somewhat changed, and I think this is the reality on the ground. So to be a political leader, I think this is a signal to people out there. And we're thinking of 4G leadership, the next 5G or 6G. I think these are the kinds of traits that we are looking out for a new set of political leaders.
If you look at times don't stand still, right? Situations change, requirements change, environments change as well. So the political leaders, exactly as what Shahril had described, they've had to evolve, right? They have to become more, as politics in Singapore becomes more normalized in that sense. They have to learn how to be elected, they have to learn how to debate, they have to learn how to be more convincing at rallies, and they have to be on social media as well. So learning the good habits and the good hygiene when it comes to communication online and stuff like that, I think that's par for the course. My bigger concern is a more cultural issue. If we consistently show, especially to younger and younger generations, that at the slightest transgression, you've got to go. And especially as we've sort of discussed in this case, when things are still not 100% clear, it seems potentially quite a harsh reaction to maybe miscommunication or indelicate communications, or as they describe it, inappropriate communications. And then a person's entire career is sort of just sort of wiped away. It doesn't encourage a society with a lot of graciousness, with a lot of kindness. It can reinforce potentially a very hard approach to anything, one strike and you're out, kind of thing. And I think that, that potentially may not be a society that we want to see, given that things are becoming more complex, it's much more competitive, there are a lot more stresses and pressures on people. But that's a bit of a general point, because again, as I say, we don't really know the ins and outs of this particular case.
You guys brought up a very good point about, now your political representatives have to be approachable, they have to be be responsive. They have to make social videos. They have to reply to your email. So it's less of you get to see me and talk to me during the MPS sessions. Now I am constantly, you are in my phones, right? So how can political office holders remain accessible without crossing the line or without giving the, perception that I am crossing the line? So what is your advice here?
In response to the resignation of Prof. Faishal, many actually commented, could he have just moved on and, apologize, say sorry, and the earlier discussion is that one strike and you are out. He could have apologized and he could have make amends and the right way is repent and not to repeat it. Would that be more and something that is acceptable? I don't know whether that's inbuilt in our political culture at this point of time, but this point of time, it gives a signal that you have to be in a way very close to perfection and dealing with people and dealing with issues, very uncompromising. But that's the system that we have built in. How do young people or political aspirants are there ensure that they do not cross the line? I think there is no hard and fast solution to that, because sometimes standards also, is determined by society. Again, this is a reflection and a political signaling of the people in power. What they do, they outline what are kind of social norms that we should abide by, and I think, of course, there will be shifts along the way, but I think the standards have to be set from a top down. Unless there is a greater debate and discursive efforts and on the ground to say that this is something that is more acceptable.
I don't think there's a short or an easy answer to what can be done, because I fully agree with what Shahril was saying, which is that the social mores of the day are basically created and it's a standard that's set by society and that changes over time. I think what could potentially be helpful for aspiring political office holders or MPs is to have increased, I'm sad to say, there's probably going to have to be increased training. There has to be actual sort of tactical training developed or curriculum developed to share with people what technology, how it's evolving and how it could be interpreted, how communications, evolve over time. But you want to say that it should be common sense to know where the lines are drawn, but A, common sense is not very common, and B, that those lines get shifted over time. So I do think it's a really tough thing, but what potentially, and I'm not saying this is necessarily been a good thing, but what this episode and the previous episodes have highlighted continuously to current and potentially future office holders as well, is that it is a very complex place. There are many, many things that you need to juggle and keep in the air, and that is unfortunately what the job entails. Now, how do we ensure that we still see a pipeline of people who want to come through and take up public office? That comes down to the messaging, to the different political parties and their recruitment efforts. But, hand on heart, I don't envy them. It's a really tough job.
Yeah, neither do I. I think it sounds like the bar is even higher right now because digital communication receipts, it's really like a double-edged sword. But at the end of the day, yeah, you're right. I think, it comes with the job. It requires a lot more training. I want to move on to talk about, Mr. Faishal's role in the Malay Muslim community. So he has been a prominent member for many years. Shahril, I want to understand from you, what role has he played and what does his departure mean for the community?
I think he has played a tremendous role in reaching out, because I think he's a more public relations person. He will turn up events, every event. You will see him is quite visible, and he will actually go down to the ground and speak to people. There are no barriers between the community and him. And interestingly, the moment he took over as acting minister in charge of Muslim affairs, he not only reached out to the religious groups, but he extended himself looking at the other sectors as well, and particularly he's very close to the arts group and also the heritage groups, which is a very strong element in the Malay Muslim community. So he was trying very hard to touch hearts and minds of people from different sectors in the Malay community, and I think he has done very well in the first year.
Shahril, you mentioned Senior Minister of State Zaqy Mohamad earlier, and he's now the acting Minister for Muslim Affairs. What will be his immediate priorities?
I think because of the sudden departure of Acting Minister Faishal, I think he really has to step up very quickly to continue the kind of work that he has introduced over the last 1 year. As I mentioned earlier, that the role of Prof. Faishal was to actually to rebuild the relations between the party and the Malay community, and so he has to continue those work. We have to be mindful that's the role, and that's the role of the Malay political leadership. Beyond their constituency work, beyond portfolios that they have to take if they are in political office, they have to basically sweeten the Malay ground, and this is rarely discussed out there, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who will touch base, become the so-called the communication line between the party leadership as well as the Malay ground. So this is a tremendous amount of work.
I mean, we talked earlier about that hole that he leaves behind. Another hole that he leaves behind is also in his GRC. Now, he's the sole minority MP for his GRC, and some people have asked if there should be a by-election. PAP Chairman Desmond Lee has already said that there won't be one, and constitutionally there is no requirement. This is something the Court of Appeals has ruled on, and under the Parliamentary Elections Act, a by-election is only triggered when all members resign. Now, is there any scenario here where, Prime Minister Wong, at his discretion, might decide to call for a by-election, Nicholas?
Oh, wow. I think that potentially, and I can't speak for the Prime Minister, but I think potentially that might be something that they wouldn't want to bring onto the table at this juncture, fairly early into this current term. But I do feel that immediately there will be a need to answer to the residents in the GRC that Prof. Faishal has since left, and especially the Malay Muslim residents who would want to feel that their interests and their concerns are still being heard and receiving the care and concern from the MPs in the area. And I've spoken to a few of the other Malay MPs, and they've said that their intent and their focus right now is to band together as a team to support Zaqy in this particular role, because they feel again, the hole that Prof. Faishal has left because of his good work and his great track record. So I think as a team collectively to start working together with the Malay Muslim ground to make sure that, hopefully all the progress that has been made doesn't fall backwards.
And I cannot let both of you leave without asking this next big question that is right now on some of our minds. What about the likelihood of a midterm cabinet reshuffle or new appointments soon? Because we now don't have Mr. Faishal, and then we also now don't have Dr. Koh Poh Koon, who stepped down from senior positions within the Manpower and Health Ministry. So what about the likelihood of a midterm cabinet reshuffle? I want to get both your thoughts on this, but I'll start with Shahril.
Oh, I can't be second guessing the Prime Minister's mind, but
I'm asking a lot from both of you.
But I'm not surprised if there is one, but I'm not sure about the timing. But there are gaps that needs to be filled. But it'd be interesting to see if there is another Malay POH because of this vacancy. Whether another Malay POH will be appointed to fill in the gaps. Because if you remember that Prof. Faishal is also holding a very important portfolio in the Ministry of Home Affairs. And, there are many issues concerning the Ministry of Home Affairs that actually touches on the Malay Muslim community as well. And that's why I think Prof. Faishal has left a big gap there. So I would say that there's a gap that to be filled, but I think it's the Prime Minister's discretion or whether a bigger reshuffle is needed at this point of time?
For sure, I think we will most likely see the elevation of some of the Malay MPs potentially into positions where they are on a pathway, potentially again depending on their performance, to take on more senior roles, maybe before the next elections roll around as well. I think PM Lawrence Wong, if not at this particular juncture, will definitely be thinking about how to elevate maybe some of the top performers. And we saw some fairly senior people coming into the lineup as first-time MPs last year in 2025 at the elections. And at the same time, we also noted that, among the then incumbent batch of SMSs, there hadn't been any elevation following the election last year. So I think that Prime Minister Wong definitely has options. And he will need to balance the immediate requirements triggered by the recent departures, but also with an eye to the mid and long term game, as it were, as he sort of builds this 4G, 4.5G, or potentially opening the door to some 5G leadership, as Shahril was mentioning, in the build up to the next elections, which have to be held by 2030. So I think he's definitely going to be balancing a few different considerations at the same time.
Yeah, so I guess we will have to adopt a wait and see approach as to, who will fill these seats or these positions. Well, thank you, Dr. Norshahril and Nicholas, for coming on to our podcast. Thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
And if you have a comment or thoughts on this episode, feel free to leave us a comment down below, or you can drop us an email at cnapodcasts@mediacorp.com.sg. Until next week, see you.